is, oh, by the way, I am passionate about disability rights. I was nurtured by a grandmother, a very brilliant woman. As you are aware, most women are more intelligent than men. Is that not a fact? It is, isn't it? Yes. My grandmother was one such a person. Unfortunately, she did not get the opportunity to see her day in a school. I think she went as far as grade 3. The reason being, she was visually impaired. So she could not proceed beyond that. But I am happy because she holds a master's degree today. And the master's degree is standing before you. Okay, so in terms of disability rights law and disability discourse, there are certain key aspects that we are concerned about, that we are particular about. The starting point is, let's ask ourselves as education practitioners, what language are we using as disability rights advocates who are in the education fraternity? Okay? I heard there was a debate about the disability, what you call it? Disability, learning disability and learning difficulties. One thing that you'll realize is that disability language is an evolving concept. There are certain things that we cannot say and certain things that we can say. For an example, there is always a debate between scholars who went to the European universities and scholars who went to the American universities. Some people will tell you that they are called persons with disabilities. Others will tell you they are disabled people. Others will talk of impairments. Others will talk of disabilities. So, what is my point? The starting point is, let's ensure that we learn the appropriate language when we are talking about disability issues. Why? Because we run the risk of being discriminatory in the process of using language that is derogatory and language that is debasing to people with disabilities. Am I talking sense? Yes. Number two, there is the issue of disability discourse, which is very, very critical. For an example, you find yourself talking to a person who is visually impaired. He or she has got an assistant with him or her. And then when you are talking to this person, you are looking at the assistant and not looking at the person who is visually impaired. Is that right? Is that right? The proper thing is you look at the person that you are talking to. Like I told you, my grandmother, she was visually impaired, but she could feel that I had lost weight or I had gained weight. How so? I can't explain. And she could tell you that you are not looking directly at her, isn't it? So these people have certain senses that are not described within the realm of what? Of the 5 senses that we learned in our everyday school. Okay, so the other thing that we need to be conscious of is the issue of the involvement of parents, experts, and school teachers. One thing that is critical in law is the best interests of the child. Every time we do what we are we doing it in the best interests of the child? I applaud Mrs. Chirwa for her presentation, isn't it? It shows that this is a parent who is cognizant of her child. Unfortunately, most parents do not take time to learn their children's issues, the strengths and weaknesses that they have, isn't it? What challenges they face at school. What do we do? The moment the children are born, the next thing they are left with the maid, isn't it? But what do people do? They have the audacity to lock their bedrooms, but leaving the most precious thing in their lives with a maid. Are we doing the right thing? Isn't it? As far as I'm concerned, that's a violation of what? Of the rights of the child. Am I talking sense? Okay. So the other thing that I was listening to was the issue of special class and special education. From a legal point of view, the term special class and special education is wrong. Okay. Why are these learners called special? What is so special about them? Can we describe their speciality? Those from the ministry, why are they called special class or special education? Or why is it said to be special education? Yes.
Thank you. In education, when we talk of special education, we talk of a need, which is special needs, underlying need, of which when talking of needs, we are talking of special provisions. Like for visual impairment, we talk of braille machines, braille material, that's a special need provision. For children with hearing impairment, we talk of hearing aids, those are special needs. Special needs also covers even curriculum, modification of curriculum, these are needs. So in education, we refer them to learners with special educational needs, not special education only.
Okay, get it from me here and today. That approach is incorrect. Am I talking sense? Why? I'm going to discuss, I hope I will have time, I'm going to talk about the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is the enabling convention that provides for the rights of people with disabilities. It says that everybody should be accorded the same opportunities on an equal basis, particularly people with disabilities. They should be accorded chance to learn on an equal basis together with all other non-disabled together with their non-disabled counterparts, isn't it? So when you describe them as special, then there is a problem. You understand? Because this is assistive technology, or it could be accommodations and supports that are clearly defined in Article 2 of the CRPD, which are simply meant to elevate their disability so that they can learn on an equal basis with their non-disabled counterpart. Like I said, from disability rights law and disability discourse, that is not being special. It's simply providing them with what? The necessary accommodations and supports. I don't know if I'm talking sense. There was also talk about technology. Article 2 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities provides for a universal design and things like assistive technology, amongst other things. So as education practitioners, explore, somebody says, think outside the box. For an example, in 2002, I was involved in a road accident. Thank God I'm alive. But I broke my right arm. I cannot ride for more than 30 minutes without having a pain. So what do? What did the university that I went to do? They supplied me with something called Dragon, naturally speaking. This is a software as explained by my namesake here, that converts speech to text. All what I do is I sit on my laptop and start talking, and it simply types what I'm saying. Okay? That's one. Two, you have got a software called Sonoset. Okay? This one is very good for students, for learners with disabilities, because it helps you capture notes. It helps you import certain things. Maybe if you want to import pictures, etc., etc. All these things are available on the website. There are so many other things. Okay, then you'll find that there is the issue of language as well. People always think that when you talk disability, you're talking about the blind or the visual impaired, the deaf blind, and so forth and so forth. There are a minimum of 15 languages for learners with disabilities. So let's think, how many do we know? Okay, in the interest of time, answer that as we go. And then I also have a beef with the evaluation part. I'm going to talk about it as we go forward. There is something called universal design for learning. This is a way of ensuring that the school curriculum, the education system, is centered around the student, not the other way around. Okay? All of us here did mathematics, didn't we? But how many of us are using it? Very few, isn't it? All of us probably did geography. And how many of us are using it? Very few, isn't it? So what are we saying? We are saying that as education practitioners, ensure that you think about learners with disabilities. Think in terms of designing curriculum and evaluation mechanisms that will ensure that they live, isn't it? There is a principle called independent living in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and participation and inclusion, which are certain key principles that after everything has been said and done must be attained, isn't it? So let's think in terms of simplifying things. Okay, somebody mentioned the aspect of giving them time and a half. If an exam is 3 hours, if they cannot cope with a 3-hour exam, you give them an extra hour and a half, isn't it? There are other alternatives as well under universal design for learning. Think in terms of doing oral examinations. Think in terms of maybe using pictorials and infographics to test learners with disabilities, and so forth and so forth. And these are key issues that we need to be thinking about as education practitioners. I don't know if I'm still talking law. Am I talking sense? Yeah, the key thing at the end of the day is we need to be ensuring that the rights of learners with disabilities, both children and adults, pedagogy and andragogy, isn't it? They are all catered for. Remember, the young learners graduate into adults, isn't it? And some of these disabilities are carried into their adulthood. So all the time, whatever we do, we must be conscious of learning disabilities. Anything else that I have left out? At the end of the day, whilst people think we want to avoid discrimination, we want to avoid violating the law. A certain gentleman is invited to a function like this one, and the instructions are strictly jacket and tie. What does this gentleman do? He comes to the conference completely naked, but with two things, a jacket and a tie. Well, all goes well for him, isn't it? But 2-3 hours down the line, down the day, as he walks out, he is arrested. Has he violated the law? Has he violated the law? Why do you say so? But he got instructions that is strictly jacket and tie. Okay, it's a debatable concept, isn't it? The question is, what is law, isn't it? I don't want an academic definition. I want us to think in terms of the general terms, what is law, isn't it? In the education context particularly. Madam psychologist has mentioned certain aspects which are legal. Okay? So, what is law? Yeah. Just in simple terms.
I think it is a legal framework whereby it shows how to conduct ourselves.
Yes, how we conduct ourselves, isn't it? Okay. Another view. Yes, madam.
Law are rules that govern specific behavior at a particular time and place.
Okay. She talks of rules, regulations that govern particular behavior, isn't it? Right. And maybe my next question is, what are disability rights? Anyone with an idea? What are disability rights? Well, in the interest of time, isn't it? We could be talking in terms of anybody wants to respond? Okay. Yes, something like that, isn't it? These are entitlements, isn't it? That people with disabilities have because they are human beings, isn't it? So if you join the two, what is law and what are disability rights, you come up with a definition, isn't it? Of what disability rights law, isn't it? Isn't it? Okay? So maybe I was too technical on my in my presentation. But what the next slide relates to sources of law, isn't it? So our sources of law is, one, there must be legislation, okay? Legislation that governs the education fraternity, isn't it? Legislation that governs disability rights. And we also have what are called precedents or case law or court decisions. I have put there 1 or 2, maybe 4 court decisions. Unfortunately, these are foreign court decisions, but they have a strong bearing on disability issues. Maybe at some point we will get a chance to discuss about them. Okay? Another source of law is usually customary law. How do we behave customarily, particularly in relation to the rights of people with disabilities? Okay? And then we've got common law. And then we've got the authoritative texts. These are writings by what are usually called jurists, writers in law, and writers in the issues that are related to the law. Okay? Why I was explaining the sources was so that people understand where we are coming from. Our sources of law in terms of disability rights is first and foremost the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And then we've got the African Disability Protocol. And then we've got local laws, which lawyers always call municipal laws, isn't it? I have given examples there. The United Kingdom has got an Equity Act, which covers disability issues. We have got in the US the American Disability Act. We have got in Australia the Disability Discrimination Act. And then in Zimbabwe, we mostly rely on our constitution, the Disabled Persons Act, Chapter 1701, the Older Persons Act, Chapter 1710, and of course, since we're talking about education, we've got the Education Act and the other acts like the ZIMSEC Act and the ZIMCHE Act and the ETC standing for Related Regulations and the statutory instruments. Probably before I proceed, I will just briefly comment about the Constitution. Our Constitution is disappointing in terms of disability rights. I will repeat, our Constitution is disappointing. If you look at Section 22 of the Constitution and Section 83, as read with some other sections, they provide for the rights of people with disabilities. Unfortunately, you will find that a reading of Section 83 of the Constitution shows that the Constitution, as it is, gives people with disabilities certain rights with the right hand and takes them away with the left hand. The question is, do they have rights? Okay? Why do we say so? It says the state must take appropriate measures within the limits of resources available. That phrase, within the limits of resources available to it, is not a good phrase. If you compare with the other rights, for an example, Section 84, which says that veterans of the liberation struggle, that is to say, etc., isn't it? It specifically says they are entitled, isn't it? Or it says they have a right. It doesn't use the term within the limits of the resources available to it. You understand? Yes. So that is what we have a problem as disability lawyers. We feel that this Constitution needs to be revisited. And it is your duty as practitioners to be aware of these things because it's your Constitution. It's not a lawyer's Constitution. Am I talking sense? Yeah. So that is problem number one. Problem number two, in 2013, on the 13th of September, Zimbabwe ratified the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities or Persons with Disabilities. Okay. But since then, we're in 2018, nothing has been done about domestication. Domestication is a concept where the country, well, the head of state goes to the UN, signs the convention, takes it in his briefcase, brings it to Zimbabwe, and presents it to Parliament. And the Parliament makes this convention an act of Parliament. That is what is called domestication. So as long as this convention has not been domesticated, it means we cannot rely upon it as disability practitioners. What is my point? My point is, as we speak now, there is no proper law that governs issues to do with disability. Am I talking sense? Yeah. So what we need to do as citizens is to then voice engage in advocacy and say, but why are these things like this? It's unfortunate Zimbabwe and mostly African countries, people do not analyze these little things which are great things to little men. I don't know why. We talk about everything else except analyze what our government is doing and why they are not doing it. So we need to domesticate the CRPD so that people with disabilities can benefit from the rights that it accords. There is so much to talk about, and there is so little time. So I have given on the slide there are certain key aspects of the CRPD. For an example, be mindful of Article 1, Paragraph 2 of the CRPD, which defines what is disability. That definition is not supposed to be exhaustive, isn't it? It's an open definition which is supposed to cover certain futuristic things. You will realize that African countries have a problem. They leave out people with chronic illnesses as people with disabilities, isn't it? Maybe for budgetary reasons, I don't know. So it is very, very important to ensure that we understand the definition of disability in the context of the CRPD, isn't it? And then also we've got certain key articles that I have listed there, more particularly Article 24, as we are gathered today, that provides for the right to education and access to education. And then we've got Article 24, I've already said, Article 12 of the African Protocol, both of which talk about an inclusive education system, isn't it? That reminds me, the other issue that I wanted to comment about was the fact that in terms of disability rights, we are moving towards an inclusive education system rather than segregation, rather than exclusion, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so I know somebody is going to talk about what is inclusive education. I'll skip that, isn't it? And then issues to do with learning disabilities have already been mentioned, isn't it? But some of the key issues there is that there is no proper definition of what inclusive education or learning disabilities are in Zimbabwe, because one, we have not domesticated the CRPD, which is our roadmap in terms of disability issues. There is an absence of political reform in terms of disability discourse. There is a very, very huge debate about this issue. I had the opportunity to discuss with the late Brigadier General Mchemo some of the things that he was talking about are a cause for concern, isn't it? There are barriers on access to education, serious barriers, starting with attitudinal barriers, cultural barriers, geographical barriers, and so forth and so forth. I will skip that. I will also skip the other slide on students with learning disabilities and how to recognize them. And then you'll find that there are so many children with disabilities, especially in least and developing countries, isn't it? Remember, the issue of statistics on disability is also a debatable concept. There are no reliable statistics. People will tell you that in Zimbabwe, 10% of our population has disabilities. But if you look at the way that figure is arrived at, it mostly focuses on the so-called visible disabilities. But there are invisible disabilities that people fail to recognize. One speaker mentioned the fact that if your child goes into a school and they can converse and they can talk, people say, no, we are Zenzis. Is that not so? Yes, which is wrong. it is not our duty to describe, isn't it? That's why they are experts, the psychologists, isn't it? The criminologists and so forth, whose duty is to assess issues of disability, isn't it? So half of the children, the world population of children with disabilities are out of school, isn't it? And there are concerns with the funding for disability education. So I will skip some of these things, isn't it? So you'll find that in sub-Saharan Africa, it's only 0.3% of education aid that goes towards early childhood development, isn't it? And we have already heard that the most important thing is to identify these disabilities before it's too late. Okay. And then there is the issue of donor aid, where there is need to have strategic priority. There are certain donor funders who are particular about inclusive education, isn't it? And there are those who partially prioritize it and those who don't prioritize it. Okay. The regional issues. Ethiopia is a promising practice. It makes sure, it has made sure that 2% of its budget goes towards inclusive education. There is mainstreaming for children with disabilities, and they have provided incentives for teachers who engage, who want to take up what you term special classes, isn't it? But this model seems to be problematic in Asia, where all teachers now want to take inclusive education classes. Across the border, we have got Mozambique, isn't it? Which is crafting an inclusive education strategy with the support from UNICEF, isn't it? Although there are weaknesses in that they have not involved CSOs, isn't it? There are concerns about budget and lack of monitoring and evaluation and law reform. I am told South Africa and Zimbabwe have got a reasonable accommodation fund. Maybe those in the ministry can shed light, isn't it? And there are other countries there are in the process of investing in inclusive education. Okay. There is the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is very, very important in also achieving access to education for people with disabilities. There are 4 Ds there, ensuring that data is correct, isn't it? Defining budgets, decentralized policy implementation, democratic planning and review policy processes, isn't it? Some of these things, please feel free to talk to me at some other time so that we can go deeper. And then the most important thing today for you is general comment number 4 of the CRPD committee. Its major highlights on the next slide there. I've just put what I thought is key, isn't it? It emphasizes that persons with disabilities, how many minutes? 2. Okay. So I will urge participants to look at paragraph 6, paragraph 25, paragraph 10, paragraph 12, paragraph 11, and maybe for those in decision-making positions, the state obligations, paragraph 38 to 41. I'll avail this general comment in soft copy. It's very, very important. Frighteningly important. Okay? And then other issues there we'll debate as we go. Maybe if we have that health break that they normally favor us with, isn't it? Let's talk in terms of advocacy. Let's talk in terms of constructive engagement. If the authorities do not listen, be prepared to go the way of strategic litigation. That's why we are there as lawyers, to help you, to assist you, push for these rights. There is no easy walk to freedom, isn't it? But what is critical is that children with disabilities must enjoy their rights on an equal basis with others. I think I will stop there, unless if you want me to address certain issues. Thank you.
Your last point, Mr. Mlaus, strategic litigation. I think as CSO, some of us, that's what we are here for. We wanted to hear that. How do we make paragraph 38 on state obligations, how do we make the state comply? So I think when the time for plenary comes, we will engage on that. A round of applause for this wonderful presentation. And I hope with those series of paragraphs that we are supposed to read on our own, we'll be able to read and under. You know, this legal jargon. We read, when we get to the lawyers, they say, no, it doesn't mean that. Thank you so much. Our next presentation is actually on inclusive education to link with what has happened. Then the technologies will come after. And in this one, we have inclusive education, the case of Petra School, presented none other than the Petra College principal, Miss Heather Wells, who in her own right holds a BA honors in education and is an educationalist with a passionate about making education work for learners. I think both those with learning difficulties and those we assume do not. Her earlier career was predominantly in the classroom, in roles ranging from primary classroom assistant, when bringing up 4 young children, through to special needs responsibility in a large secondary setting. She has also taught just about everything at secondary level, and she will share with us those experiences. Heather then spent several years within regional education, driving policy development, championing effective change management, promoting teacher development, and involved in the design and build of new purpose-built schools. In 2011, she moved to Zimbabwe, where she has been a consultant to schools within the ATS and is now, as I've already introduced her, as a principal of Petra College, where she is spearheading Petra's passion for learners and building capacity among staff to see individuals aiming high, ensuring that they fulfill their purpose and passion and meet the challenges that inevitably come. Her background has been in education, as I've said, throughout her career up to now, with the passion for making education accessible for all, hence the inclusive education. Accessible, excellent, quality, and innovative in its delivery. Madam, it's your turn. Let's welcome her with a pom-pom.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Have you managed to put the... Is it in? Doesn't seem to be. It's not wanting to do anything, which is very sad. No, it's not liking your computer. Never mind, we'll make a plan. This is just to make sure, sorry, you're going to see me over this, just to make sure I don't go off track, because I'm conscious we have a limited amount of time. So I'm just going to make sure I can see the slides from here as we go forward. As you've already heard, I'm the principal of Petra College, and one of my passions right the way through education has been how do we make learning accessible for our children and young people? Because I don't always feel what we do is, which is a risky statement, isn't it? If you can go on to the next slide for me. there are a number of famous quotes that we have that I've used a number of times in talks that I've been given, and they all just point to the one fact, is what are we actually doing with our children in schools? Are we actually delivering something that works for them individually and corporately? Albert Einstein, an amazing man, but if you read the history of him, which I was doing the other day, when he was at school, he was called thick. When he left school, his leaving report basically said he wasn't going to go anywhere, he couldn't do anything, he didn't concentrate and had absolutely no plan. And we all know his name today, so he clearly achieved something. It's interesting, isn't it, that education in the way that we do it doesn't always work. Could you do the next slide for me? The current education program we have is what I would call a linear process. And it means we take a child in at ECDA, and we go through a process with them of exams and assessments and learning, and out the other end comes a child who has achieved exams. They've got results, they can move on to the rest of their lives. But we've made one assumption, and we've made the assumption that as they come into the classroom, they're all the same shape, and that we can put them through the same process and we can get the result that we require. Now, any of us who've ever been in a classroom or have children of our own know that no child is the same. And as a parent, I remember when my children were little, always comparing them with other people's children. Well, mine walked earlier than yours. Mine can speak better than yours. Mine's much more generous. And we always have those expectations of individual children. And yet when we put them in the classroom, we say, okay, now you're 4, you're all the same. And that's a bit crazy, really, isn't it? And I think that's the point I started to look at education and think, hang on, is this actually doing the best we can for our children? If we think about us as humans, we are those 3 things. We are not the same. If I look around the room, we all look different. We've all got different clothes on, and we present ourselves differently. We have different experiences. We bring different skills into any environment that we come into. We are dynamic human beings, and we can't pretend we're not. So if we are dynamic and we're not one size fits all, then we have to think about how we do things differently. Our brains are designed to absorb learning. We are hardwired to learn. From the time we're tiny, right the way through to the time we die, we are designed to learn. And our brains provide us with a map of the world. They enable us to access information, to learn information, to store it, to try things, to experiment, many, many different things. But that brain is the thing that actually means we function as individuals. If you can go on to the next one, please. If you think of a tiny baby when they're born, they're pretty helpless, aren't they? There's very little they can do, but they do know they need feeding. And you know that they need feeding because they make a lot of noise. But we do know that from the time a child, from 0 to 3, the development in a child's brain is astronomical. You think about what a child achieves in those 3 years. They've gone from being helpless to walking, talking, eating by themselves, probably dressing themselves. They understand their place in the world. They know their relationships in family. They have absorbed a huge amount of information, but that's just the beginning. We have a number of different areas that we are hardwired to learn in. And all of these things, I believe, and I'm actually getting to the Petra College bit now, I believe that all these 6 C's are critical to what we do in schools. And it's one of the things that drives us at Petra to actually do the things in the way that we do. Because we're individual, we can't just do things in one way. Now, sometimes you'll see these 6 C's and people will refer to them as 21st century skills. Maybe they are. I actually think they're human skills. And I think they're skills that potentially we have lost sight of because we've gone through a formal education process. We formalized it to make it work. And you can understand that. If you think back to the industrial revolutions around the world, they needed people able to perform tasks, work in teams, collaborate to read and write, basic things. But actually, the process that we go through hasn't really changed that much. And yet, those 6 skills on the screen are ones that we have to, absolutely have to introduce into our schools. Because that's what defines us as human beings. That ability to collaborate, to work together. The ability to think critically about what we're being told. I hope that as you're sitting here now, you're not just saying, oh, that's, yeah, very good. You're saying, do I agree with that? Do I not agree with that? Is that rubbish? How would I challenge that? Critical thinking, we have to do it. Because unless we're able to make our own point and to argue our own case, we don't really know what we think. We just merely copy somebody else. Creativity. There's a wonderful gentleman who does a lot of work with education called Ken Robinson. I'm sure some of you have heard of him. And one of the things he claims is that our education system kills creativity. And if you think about it, particularly at the tiny level, when they come into ECD, actually we do. We stop them from that imaginative play. We stop them from going out and having fun and just doing crazy things because we want organized classrooms. As teachers, we like neat and tidy. But neat and tidy isn't a 3-year-old. It's not even a 7-year-old. We have to allow kids to be kids because that's how they learn. We learn through play. We learn through experience. We don't learn by sitting and being talked at. None of us are really very good at that for very long, so I should keep this very short. Caring. We need to know that our children can care for each other. One of the things at Petra that we do is we have a very varied enrollment, which means children learn how to deal with people who are different to them. And it's fantastic. I was walking down the corridor at the school the other day, and there was one of our students in her wheelchair being pushed along, allegedly, by her friend, who was actually just hanging off the back of the wheelchair, and they were just going down a slope. I'm sure health and safety in some country would have a problem with that. Next slide, please. So how should we be helping learners? All of those things up there are important for us. Meeting individual need, I've already spoken about, but the global perspective, we are not in isolation. And when I talk about Petra, I talk about it as being a school without borders. Because no longer is a school an isolated institution that has no input from anywhere else. If you think about what students in schools have access to, they've got internet, they've got friends, they've got connections around the world. And we can't ignore that. So the more we try and make sure that our children actually just deal with what we want them to deal with, we're missing a huge opportunity. If we teach them how to interact globally, we teach them how to work in a community and collaborate, they're much better citizens when they leave us at school. In the classroom, it's very easy as a teacher, isn't it, to see 30 children sat in front of you, or 50, or however many it is, and to see one group of humanity that you need to teach this concept to. The reality is you have a room full of individuals. And if you teach something in one way, you're probably only actually going to connect with about 20% of your class. If you teach it in 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways, 5 ways, you're going to get a different response. And one of the things we have to do as teachers is to understand that we have to present information, we have to engage students, and we have to empower them to learn. And that requires a different approach. And it's an approach at Petra which we call learning to learn. And it's not about a teacher standing up at the front of the classroom and saying, we're now going to learn this, and I'm going to teach it, you're going to learn it, and then we're all going to go home. It's about saying, how do you learn, and how can I help you to learn? So teaching a concept in a way that it's accessible to anybody else. The learning process I started talking about just now, building blocks. The building blocks that start from the moment we're born, actually a little bit before we're born, but when we're born, all of those things that are on there are things that are put into place. And as schools, we have an impact on how those things reflect in a student's life. Their emotional intelligence, if that is not set well, then they struggle to work in a community. They struggle with their social skills. if they don't have the ability to understand where they fit in society, within their peer group, within their families, it has a problem. I used to teach in England, and one of the biggest issues we had in the schools that I taught in was that students had very low aspirations. And that was because we lived in a part of the country where we had third-generation unemployment. So we had children in school whose parents and grandparents had never held down a full-time job. And so those children didn't have any idea about what it was to go out to work, to earn a living, to have that level of respect and responsibility. You try teaching a group of children who've never experienced that, and you have a different scenario. And for some of us here, we're dealing with families who also have been in those situations where families are really struggling. But we have to understand the impact on learning in that situation, and we have to help them to overcome it. School has to be the safe place that we go to that actually enables children to learn and to flourish. Sometimes that means we're putting aside the things that are bugging us. As a teacher, you come into school in the morning sometimes, and the last thing you want to do is actually see a class full of children. It's like, really, I've had a bad morning, leave me alone. But you put on your professional face, so you go in and you do your day. And we have to do that. And it's the same for a child. We have to help them to be able to put aside some of the things that are troubling them and help them to be free to learn. If you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, or you're worried about the bully in the next classroom, you're not going to learn because your basic needs have not been met. So you have to do things differently. One of the other things we did in England, in the same school, was the number of children that came to school who had not had breakfast. So first lessons of the day were completely pointless because all they were thinking about was the fact, I need food. So we introduced breakfast. Suddenly, those first few lessons were meaningful and the students enjoyed learning because their basic need had been met. We have to think about those things. Okay, one more. Thank you, so we've just done that one. So we have an essential understanding at Petra College, which we try and achieve three things. We want to help a child to understand their purpose. What is their purpose in life? And that doesn't mean knowing what their career is, but it means understanding what they want to achieve. They want to achieve their potential, achieve their best. Once we can understand what their purpose is, out of that we then discover what their passion is. When you have your purpose and your passion, it's then quite easy to identify what the challenges are going to be. And that's where this inclusivity comes in. Because we have to help children to understand how to overcome or to deal with the challenges that life has thrown at them. And that may be a learning challenge, it may be a social challenge, it may be an economic challenge. But we have to help them to be able to be prepared to overcome that. We need to look at the past and the future. We can look at the past and we can talk about that linear process. And we can look at the future and say, actually, we don't know what the future holds for our children. Because the careers they're going into, the opportunities, the technological advances are massive. And we can only predict what some of the careers are going to be. But we can prepare them for it. But in order to do that, we have to understand the individuals that we're dealing with. So how are we doing this at Petra? We really believe in inclusion, and we don't just say those things, we want it to actually work. So we look at individual learning styles. We will take a child and we will try to understand how they learn. I'll give you an example. We had a young man who came to us about 4 years ago, and he came from progress class in a junior school, and he came with a report that said, this child is very dull. This child will never achieve very much. This child is not very clever. That was his leaving report from his junior school. How depressing is that? We took him in and we thought, okay, let's see what we can do. And we spent about 6 weeks observing him in lessons and just seeing how he was doing. And after about day 2, my colleague and I looked at each other and said, this child's really bright. What on earth is going on? And we spent a little while assessing him and trying different things, and we discovered how he learnt. We discovered what his learning style was. And it definitely wasn't sitting at a desk, copying off a board, and regurgitating that information in a test. He could not do that. But we discovered how he learnt. We taught him how he learnt. We then devised an individual education plan for him, where he got support in classes, where we enabled him to access special assistance in exams, so that he had a reader, because when he was reading, his brain was so occupied on reading, he couldn't understand what he read. But when we read it to him, he knew exactly what we meant. That young man last year got 7 O-levels at A to C. That's what inclusion's about. It's not about always success at that level, but it is about allowing a child to actually achieve their potential by doing things differently. That young man is now doing A-levels. He's an amazing star. He's my shining star, because he came from somewhere where nobody believed he could do it. And all we did was talk about, how do you learn? Let's make this work. So now, if we could carry on with the same young man, but I won't. Aspirations. A child coming in who comes in with low expectation because of a previous experience, or from a family background that is not helpful, has no aspirations. And we all know if we get up in the morning and we don't have a plan and there's nothing to do, we do nothing. Yeah? We just go, okay. And we just drift through the day. If you have aspirations, you have a purpose. Back to my purpose and passion. Then you start to achieve things. So spending time with children, helping to understand what makes them tick. And if what makes them tick is playing rugby or singing on the stage, fantastic. Use that as the key to unlock their learning potential. Opportunity. Give them opportunity to try things. One of the biggest blessings you can do as a teacher, I've discovered, is you can make mistakes. As a teacher, make mistakes in your lessons. Allow children to see that it's okay. It's okay to try something and get it wrong, because you can always put it right, as long as you learn from that mistake. And if a child asks you a question and you don't know the answer, the worst thing you can do is to make something up, because then that's not helpful. What you can say is, do you know what? I don't know. Let's find out. And suddenly you've got that child on board, because they're thinking, wow, my teacher doesn't know everything. This is okay. We can learn together. Accessibility. We have to make learning accessible. And that's back to my earlier point. Humans are dynamic. How do we make our learning accessible? By doing different things, and we're going to look at some technology later. But it's also about the resources in our teachers. How do we equip teachers to be able to teach differently and to get alongside kids and understand how they learn and what makes them tick? That's really important. I'm sure you've all seen this saying before, but I love it. Because, see, I think I was probably the fish when I was in school. So if you set children a task and you say you pass or fail on this task, then it's not going to work. The image was of an elephant, a fish, and a monkey, asking them to climb a tree as a fair test to see who was best. Now, the elephant could knock the tree down, so I guess technically he could then climb it because he could walk over it. The monkey could just climb it. The fish, completely out of water, literally. And I think sometimes we need to remember this phrase. I think it's brilliant. Remind you of what it is you're trying to achieve. You're trying to help children to learn in a way that works for them, and you cannot apply a uniform test to that. So Petra College, very quickly as we go through, we have what we call skills-based learning. And that means we have a skills centre within the school that is manned by a number of teaching assistants, and they work in classes with children who are on the register of children who need additional support. And that can be for gifted and talented, as well as for those with learning challenges or a physical disability. Where we can, we offer one-to-one support, and that'll be for specific things that a child needs to improve on. Exam support. Exam boards are very good if you do the paperwork at allowing you to give special access to students. So we work very hard. I think with our Cambridge exams this year, we had about 25 students who had special access. It's labour intensive because we have to put them in individual rooms and have separate invigilation, but actually it works and it allows them to succeed in the way that works for them. Differentiation, how we teach differently. And that's not about always new things, it's about doing things differently, thinking differently. How can you teach somebody the 6 times table when they haven't got it 7 times before? The different ways of doing the same thing. And we also celebrate achievement versus success. So for some children, getting 6 A stars at O level is fantastic and you'd expect them to do it. For some, getting 2 C's at O level is absolutely amazing. And the difference between achievement and success is really important to define and to celebrate. Because children need to understand when they personally have been successful. And that may look very different from the child who has achieved high results. That's a very key difference for us. What are the benefits of inclusion? For me, it's all of these things, but it's about individual success and integrated society, I think, more than anything. What I love about Petra is that we have students of all abilities. So we have our 6 A stars and we have those that struggle. But actually they work together because somewhere along the line, the child who is struggling is good at something. And it's finding that something and helping them to be successful. We had a young man who, how could I put this nicely, was quite cheeky in classroom because he didn't like being in a classroom. He wasn't a child who wanted to sit still. He needed to be on the move. And many teachers were struggling with him. We put on a school play last year, and he did a little comedy cameo in the middle of that play, and he completely came alive. And every teacher went, "Ah, now we know what to do with him." And since that day, they've been able to play on that skill of his and find ways of engaging him in learning. And now his marks have gone up hugely. Just that simple acknowledgement of, this is what you're good at, let's use it. Let's make it work for you. Family pride is a big thing, isn't it? I've met with so many parents here who really struggle because their child is not going to get 10 A levels. I had a parent phone me last year when their results came through and said, I've paid all this money, why has my child not got 10 O levels? And I said, well, it's because they've done so well. They have succeeded here because of these challenges. And people don't like to acknowledge their child needs some extra support. But we all do. Every single one of us needs support at some point in our lives. So there's no shame in that, and we have to encourage parents to seek the help their children need, because we can make a huge difference. And as I'm sure you've heard already today, the earlier we start, early intervention is absolutely key. If we can start identifying children in ECD, we can minimize the problems that we have when we get through to secondary school and beyond. Self-belief. How many of us want our children to be confident? And confidence comes with questioning and sometimes a little bit of pushback, but I'd much rather have a classroom full of children who are asking questions because they were confident in their own ability than a class full of children who were just silent because they were scared. So building confidence, building self-reliance, and helping children to achieve their potential is absolutely huge. I can answer the question, yes, it is possible in Zimbabwe. So many people have said to me, but we can't do this. We don't have resources. Yes, we do. We don't have all the latest technology, but we have amazing people. And we have amazing, skilled people here who can help us to improve what we do. It requires commitment, it requires time, and it requires stepping outside of our comfort zone. And that's not always easy for people. I have to remember that I'm somebody who loves change. I thrive on making things happen and change. So I have to remember sometimes, but for other people that's quite scary. And that's okay. But working together, we can make a huge difference. It's absolutely possible in Zimbabwe. At Petra, we've started that journey, and it's really working. It's making a difference in kids' lives. And I think it's something that we need to do more of. That's a very quick overview of what we do and how we do it. I'm very happy to take questions. I'm very happy to give contact details if people want to talk to me more outside this meeting. But thank you for listening. Inclusion does work, guys. Thank you very much.
I was wondering, as you were presenting, Mrs. Wells, whether as a community, are we served better as a school head or when you were still in the classroom, because you have that passion of doing it. And in many cases, we have lost the best classroom practitioners because they have to go up because they are better rewards, but also we need them in administration because this can cascade and spread. So I was really debating whether this person should be right in the classroom or should be overseeing the education system. Another upload for this powerful presentation. Thank you so much, and we are proud to have education leaders who have the hands-on skills and the knowledge. And I hope teachers who work under you are not jittery to say, if the principal comes into my class and I'm doing that I won't mention, she will just tell that this is not teaching. But of course, for the learners and the parents, they are happy because the headmistress also knows, the principal knows what's happening, and that's very important. We will have, I would say, a conclusion of a presentation began earlier by a presenter I won't need to introduce unless you insist, because this presentation happened before I even allowed it. But we have to complete it, and then we hope to have more time for the engagement, and I hope, Madam, you'll be here to take one or two contributions from the whole house, so that at least we can engage. So let's finish up the presentation that began earlier on, and I know you all have passion for technology because you started it before we came into it. Trends in assistive technologies for students with learning difficulties. Take it over, Dr. Nyoni. Let's welcome him.
Yeah, okay, thanks, yeah, thanks, I'll lead it. Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming from lunch, and so people are a little bit dozy, but with Heather's presentation, people were really looking up, and but no, because we're not going to have a break, a healthy break, I'd like us to stand a little bit. Just I want you to raise your hands and face like that, right? We're going to do a 9 times table using our hands, right? So that thumb there, the left thumb is 1, going that way, right? So it's, if we say 9 times 1, 9 times 1, let's bring our thumb down, and what do we have? 9, right? Then it changes a little bit when we come to 9 times 2, right? But we still continue with, this is 1, and this is 2, and then we bring down that 2, right? Everyone should be like this, right? So anything on the left-hand side of the thumb, of the finger that is lying down, becomes a 10, right? So 9 times 2, we have 1, 2, then we have 10, 11, 12, okay. Let's try 9 times 3. 1, 2, and 3, right? What do we have? 10, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. Right? Let's change. That's natural technology. Let's try 9 times 7, because I see people are tired already. 9 times 7. So if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What we have? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63. We can take our seats. Is that technology that works? I see there's peer teaching going on for those that didn't get it, which is quite good. But what is this to say is like I say, we have a series that we've developed at Power, which says Get Out of the Classroom series, where we're saying teachers should be creative. Heather was talking about being creative. Come up with different ways of teaching. Come up with different ways of approaches in terms of teaching. Instead of that child cramming 9 times 1, 9 times 2, all the child has to do is to use their fingers. There are other things that we can do using our natural fingers. I call that our natural technology, right? Creativity, again, in the classroom. Bring bread. Why you talking of counting, early classroom? Why don't you bring a loaf of bread? 20 slices, you are separating. Kids eat bread. 15 slices, when you eat 2, what do we get? And kids actually eat 2 slices of bread. It's fun, it's creative, but it's a learning way of doing it. It's an active way of learning. So you are bringing all these sensory approaches, and that's key. Learning difficulties. What do we use? We have what we call assistive technologies, right? What Themba raised was an issue of where in Zimbabwe we don't have legislation, right? The United States actually uses as a legal term for what assistive technologies are. The Assistive Technology is defined by the 1997 Individuals with Disability Education Act as an item of equipment or product system, whether acquired commercially off the shelf, modified or customized, that is used to increase or improve functional capabilities of children with disabilities. When we don't have that kind of legislation in the country, it becomes difficult for us to insist or take the government to task and say, you are not providing this, whereas Constitution says this should be done. One of the first ones that I talked about earlier was the C-pen. I wish I could have demonstrated, but I think the sound and so on, it becomes a little bit of a challenge in the time. But you are free to come in and visit, or after this, to come in and see how these technologies work. One of the things that this pen does, like I say, you can take it into an exam, it scans and it reads, it has earphones, and the child can also make audio notes onto it. It has a recorder on it, right? It's an ideal pen for one that has learning difficulties, that is reading problems. The next one that I'm going to look at, that you're going to look at, is the casual. That one was okay. Yeah, it's fine. That one is a program called Clicker. Clicker 7, it's version 7 now. With Clicker, it's exciting in the sense that you can use it for different things. I'm just going to use this example. This is one of my students. Go back to this is one of my students. She likes art. She goes to the art gallery for art lessons. She's about 10, and she's dyslexic, right? But now we need to, her strength is art, right? And so for vocabulary build-up, we go in and say, okay, let's create a book for yourself. Says, okay, I want to write a book, and my book is about animals. She decides to pick up animals. And the first one that she did, she got a picture and put up animals. The animals, let's go on to the next page, of that book. She writes up. The interesting thing about that, maybe I should get next to can I have my crutches? Is it going to? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Can I have it? Okay, thanks. Yeah. So. That's a lot. You see, this program has quite a number of activities. For instance, it has a keyboard, right? That keyboard is predictive. This girl couldn't spell a lot of those words, and what this program does, it helps the kid. Say, maybe for instance, we want to spell friends. She knows that what the word friends, she knows what friends are. And she can sound it well, friends. But she needs to say, okay, how do I write friends? And then she would go and say, okay, let's look at what would be friends. What do you think would be the first letter? And say, okay, let's put down. What do you think? Do you think we still have it in here? Let's see if we have it in here. Then she tries it here and says, could this be the one? Now it says, no, that's not the word that I'm looking for. Is this this one?
From. No,
it says, no, it's not from. I'm looking for friends. So there's a okay? So the next one should be, right? It says, there it is. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Right, it says, can I find it here? It says, okay, no, I've tried that one, let me try this one. It says,
found.
Is that the word that I want? Yeah, that's the word that I want. And she uses that word. Right? And by so doing, they are creating their own book. They are creating we are looking at vocabulary build-up. She's building up vocabulary for herself. And then she continues with her book. She continues with her book and goes to the next page. Sorry. I'm looking at stuck. Okay. She continues on to the next page. Remember, this girl is good at drawing. Look at that giraffe, right? She drew that giraffe, right? And she goes on. We have a TV in the office. What is TV then? What do we use for this TV for, right? He says, okay, I've done all this. I've talked about a giraffe. I've talked about a kangaroo, but I've never seen a kangaroo. Where do I get information about a kangaroo? We go onto the TV and watch a clip from YouTube, right? Or on a phone, YouTube. Go on a video and watch a video on YouTube. And watch a video on giraffes, right? What that then does, we are looking at vocabulary also. She listens, right? What the narrator is saying about the giraffe, and she picks up information from there and comes back and writes something about a giraffe, about a kangaroo onto that. That is one, that's another tool that we can use. Another one that we have is the Casual 3000. The good thing about this software is that it has a lot of, for people that have problems with organization of their work, there's a lot that can be done. But the interesting thing is that all the child's textbook can be scanned into this software, right? Because the kid cannot read. And so this is what the software does, it reads for the child.
How much for ingredients in this soup? A, about 6 minutes. B, exactly 14 minutes. C, about 18.
Okay. It has different voices. It is about 20 different voices, I think. The speeds, you can vary the speed. You can have it maybe 4 words a minute, if it's slow, it highlights, and if you want John to read, you click on John. And for kids that have challenges in terms of attention, that variation of voices and speed becomes encouraging, becomes capturing for the child to continue reading. So your entire textbook, all the textbooks, the kid can then scan those books into that software. There is another one called, this one is brilliant in terms of, I really enjoy this one. It's called the beam, the e-beam, right? Remember I talked about getting out of the classroom situation. This software allows the child, allows this class teacher to it turns any flat surface into an interactive board, right? It turns any surface into an interactive wall. Imagine if you are right in Cholocho, deep down in Cholocho there, all you need is a generator or a battery for that software. You plug in, there are tools for it, you plug in, and that wall, that mud wall becomes an interactive wall. If we're working with an OT and want the child to work on the board, there is a tool for that, and the child works on the board for that. You can highlight, it's very exciting. And then we have one that Peggy was talking about. Let me have the mic. That Peggy was talking about, thanks. It's called the dragon. What the dragon does, okay, now we can't use the same mic. But what the dragon does, like as Peggy said, it converts speech to text, right? You talk and it writes for you. This also gives a challenge to the youth out there to say, all these gadgets that we have are using English. Imagine if we had the C-pen, which is Ndebele, or Shona, or Tonga. That would be incredible, isn't it? Imagine if we had the casual that read that all your textbooks, your all your setup, and you're able to make notes. That software is able to read the books for the child. That would be quite interesting, isn't it? And then finally, because of time, there's one software that the interesting thing about the Dragon is that it's free, right? You can take it on your phones, your mobile phones, download it, and have a situation where you're able to okay, let's try this one. This is a boy. this is a boy. Full stop, space, I am, space, no, wrong, backspace, 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 oh, okay, it's supposed to backspace, but but basically, you pick up the sense on what you now it's done with backspace. What I wanted to do, right? But imagine what you could do with that kind of software in your classroom, right? And not only in your classroom. Talk about skill when you're skill, you do your skill. Then right Monday. Seeing over the school holidays, you'll be doing your scheme work and whatever. You could use that software, right? So that most of us here, we use our phones for WhatsApp, for emails, and that's it. Oh. Most of us here only use about 10% of the capacity of what our smartphones can do. So when you're preparing your scheme for next year over the holidays, download the Dragon application and use it. Try it and then use it with your kids. There's another software. This is a very nice one for a child who is attention deficit. Right? Remember, these kids are always hyperactive, most of them. Sorry. Those that have hyperactivity. And you're looking at a situation whereby you want to talk about use of science, right? Teaching science. And here you are in a lab, but you don't have a lab, right? You could use this software. It's a virtual lab, right? Look at that and says, okay, in this kit you learn how to extract salt from sea by crystallization. And then it gives you instructions. It says, drag that bucket onto we have equipment. There's the Bunsen burner. There's the tripod stand. There's the bucket. You need to pull this and put it here, right? And you say, okay, it tells us, oh, that is water, and which is sodium, whatever it is, sodium chloride. And then it says, okay, let's light up that burner, right? There, right? Let's see what's happening, right? It gives us, it say, this is what is happening when this is happening. Okay, what does it? This is what is happening when this is what is happening. With water, there it is, the water particles, there they are. Sodium ions are in another brown color. Chlorine ions, they're in another color. And it can create a chart for you. It can create, it's safe. Imagine giving a child who is hyperactive, you're giving hydrochloric acid or sulfuric acid, concentrated sulfuric acid, and you expect this child to work safely with other kids in a lab. It's a disaster, isn't it? Right? But they can safely do it here. And even much better, because they are actually seeing what the atoms are doing, isn't it? So there are quite a lot of this has maths, there's science, there's quite a lot. So that's another software that the school can have and use with kids that have learning difficulties. There are so many of them. We have calculators. For instance, we have calculators that, what we call them talking calculators, right? Instead of that number, I remember the 1,000 and what. it's easy when you use this token calculator. All it does, you punch in the number and it will read that number for you. Right? So there's so much. Like I say, there are literally thousands of different things, of assistive technologies that you can use with kids with various learning difficulties. For those that have hearing, that have challenges with hearing, sight, so on, Braille, and so on. But they're more than Braille. There are other products that are there in the market. All it needs is for the school to think out of the box, to be creative, and to research and get equipment that is ideal for your kids. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Nyoni, there is a time in the history of this country when computers were being donated throughout the country, and I don't know whether the headmasters here amongst us would confirm that those computers are there. Otherwise, assistive technology is coming rather late because everyone will be downloading Dragon, and you say it is for free? And the teachers can do schemes, and they are complaining, Mrs. Moore, that this new curriculum is taking so much time for us and the like. So I think there are facilities that are not going to help learners, but are going to help the teachers. We are really grateful for this, and I hope it really answers the issues of saying, improving and attending to the learning difficulties so that we can have a really and a truly and a genuinely inclusive education process, because there is more than one program or software or facility that can actually assist classroom practitioners and all of you as stakeholders in ensuring that we have a better way of attending to some of these educational challenges. Can we give Dr. Nyoni another round of compound? Then to some interventions, it could be questions, it could be additions, it could be examples. I know someone wanted to say, instead of this is a boy, they wanted another sentence to really confirm it. But I know we believe it. That is not pre-recorded, you know. So we don't want anyone to want to tamper with that technology. We believe it. We want other interventions that are not about that particular issue. And then we have these, and our presenters, even if there are some outstanding questions from carryover questions from previous sessions, I think it's time that we engage, but not repeating that which we have already discussed. I'll take the first 5 hands as being the norm, and then our presenters respond. Time willing, we keep on doing that. So can we show by raise of hands? 5, not 7, 5. Sorry. And 4. This is for dog. It's for doctor. Okay. And no, both. Yeah. In the absence, should I pose my own questions? Which should be unfair, because I can't be the only one who was interested in this. These 3 powerful presentations. I have my own notes, but I can't monopolize the space. We are a democracy. 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 this side. For fairness, 4. So, okay, 5. In that order, please. First, thank you for remembering that we rise.
This one is for Mrs. Nkombe concerning this sentence focus on academic skills being too early. How can this be corrected, Mrs. Mkombe, as this is a government policy that our children are supposed to go to school early?
Question number 2. Thank you.
Maybe I'll sit down.
This technology is no longer assisting us.
Shall I move forward? Few comments about how I think it was from the
if you may rise, if you don't mind.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
That's okay. The psychologist mentioned something earlier about how we don't have state support for the changes that we need to implement. And I just wondered if maybe ministry could comment on ways that we can move forward to help inclusion progress.
Thank you. Number 3 is next to you.
Okay, thank you very much for such a powerful conference. My question, maybe I have been inspired by Mrs. Chiro. I have a relative, they have a child who is having some learning difficulties. But what I have seen is that most of the parents, they don't want to accept that their children, they have those problems. Actually, the parent, the relative is a teacher. So they will be trying to crank this child. They are taking this child to extra lessons. They will take this child doing the homeworks with them up maybe until 10 p.m., 11 p.m., trying to make them better. So I don't know what really can be done maybe to assist, especially parents, because most of the parents, they want their children to excel academically. They don't think there is any other way out in life apart from doing well at school.
Thank you. We know teachers have commercialized these extra lessons, and I don't know whether the ministry is seeing this. Question number 4. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir. Okay.
Mine is not a question. Actually, it's a comment. I wanted to say the applications, the software applications that the last presenter gave us now, to me, I'm simply saying this is very excellent, because it simply means that whatever concept, even the most abstract ones, you can teach them to any level, to any child, to any person at whatever given time, as long as we are using these assistive devices. Because these computer systems, they are more exciting to anyone, even the adult persons. So as long as we put them right, you'll find that whatever concept is teachable to anyone at any given time. So coming back to the teachers, this new curriculum, which seems to be troubling most of us, I think those very new things that are coming in, we can even go through via these applications to say what is at stake, what is hidden behind the scenes that we never did in the olden days. I think we can go a long way as far as assisting everyone around us is concerned. Thank you so much. Knowledge is power. I'm empowered.
Thank you. And I hope next year's results will definitely be different. Now we can have most of them were comments and way forward, but there was a question, especially for Mrs. Mukombe. Oh, the last one, yes.
And question has been taken away, because I wanted to say, I think the issue of learning difficulties applies to many learners in schools, especially to disadvantaged communities where they don't have a lot of material. So I think the important thing is how can all teachers then use this software? That's what we should be thinking about. Thank you.
I think that's open for us all to input on that last question. The what is to be done under our circumstances. because we've all seen it's doable. So why are we not doing it? I think that's the question. It's doable. So what are the impediments? Over to you, because the rest were more of comments.
Just to answer the question, there's nothing wrong with children attending a facility to learn. It's about how they learn. And we need to understand that children as young as 2 and 3 need to learn with their bodies. Their brains aren't learning yet, their bodies still need to learn. So we need to understand as educators how long and how their bodies need to move so that they are capable of acquiring academic knowledge at a later age. It's simply unacceptable for the 3-year-old to be sat at a desk in front of a worksheet. Unacceptable, because their body is not capable of that yet. There's nothing wrong with them going to a facility, an educational facility, but education is not just about attaining knowledge via learning a textbook. Education is about what my body needs in able to facilitate that later. And once we get that understanding of what children need, I get shivers when I hear of even a 6-year-old starting to learn to write. It's too early. We're pushing them too early. Parents want everyone to be a doctor and a lawyer and, oh yes, the earlier we drill their times tables into them, the better. Absolutely not. It's creating a generation where their bodies aren't capable of learning the stuff later that we need them to learn. So they need to play. They need to play in specific ways. They need to do things that we were doing as children, to learn to take risks. Risky play, unstructured play. Not just scheduled this and this, scheduled that and that. We'll put them through these drills. Actually, they need to swing upside down from the monkey bars. And they need to climb over things, and they need to climb up trees. The amount of time I've said to a parent, the tree, do your kids climb trees? And they look at me like I'm nuts. But it's crucial, it's a crucial skill. They need to crawl around the floor and under desks. They need to build forts out of cardboard boxes. They need to dress up as doctors and nurses like I did when I was at preschool. That was my favourite part, in the corner, and pretend to be things, and to move, to jump over things, to climb. How many of our ECD playgrounds have all of the equipment? They don't. They have a couple of swings and a seesaw. But actually these kids need to be jumping up and down. They need to be moving. They need to be rolling in the dirt. They need to be allowed to get their uniforms dirty. Because if they're dirty, they've learned something. If they fell down and skinned their knee, then they've learned something. And what we do is we take that away now. Don't climb a tree because they're going to get a broken arm. Okay, they're going to learn not to do that risky move again where they jump from that branch to that branch. And their bodies need to learn those things before their brains can actually acquire knowledge. And that's what we need to do. Nothing wrong with them being in a facility if that's the best thing. There's also nothing wrong with them staying at home if they have a home environment that is capable of facilitating that physical learning as well. So we need to not be stuck saying that the policy is this, they will go to school at this age for everybody. Because children are ready to learn at different times in their development. Do I want to mention about the... Oh, okay. All right. Sherilyn's heard me talk somewhere else. I spoke a few weeks ago at the ECD orientation at Petra. And very recently there was a BBC story about how our surgeons are now lacking the dexterity to suture their patients when they're done. Because they're not playing. Do you want a neurosurgeon anywhere near you that doesn't have the dexterity to suture? And surgeons now who are training the next generation of surgeons are saying that this is a huge issue. And for that to be a story, this is not an isolated incident. This is a big issue in that training school. And this is one of the leading surgeons in the UK. Said, I am now really frightened for what children are learning. They don't have the dexterity to suture. And you want them poking around in your brain? No. Because they can't even stitch. Because they're not playing. They're not putting things together. They're not... things that we used to do, making daisy chains, or, you know, sticking